Tonight we're tracing a line that could redraw the decade. It starts with a single plume of smoke above a NATO town, a logistics depot in eastern Poland, a radar site near the Baltic, a convoy parked just inside Alliance territory. There's a flash, cell phones rise, sirens begin, and within minutes a sentence appears on every screen. An incident on NATO soil is under investigation. The world doesn't breathe. The question that follows is not legal, it's practical. Does Article 5 move from ink on a page to the engine of history? Because if one ally is attacked, all allies are attacked, and the United States doesn't watch from the sidelines. The United States becomes the spine of the story. In the first moments, confusion is a weapon. Radar tracks are messy, telemetry noisy, eyewitness accounts contradictory. Was it a missile, a drone, a glide bomb, or debris from a battle next door? Was it a deliberate strike or a provocation designed to be deniable? In secure rooms across Europe and the US, analysts pore through the data. Launch bearings, speed profiles, infrared signatures, radio chatter. At the same time, air patrols expand like ripples, air defense batteries rotate outward, and naval task groups adjust posture. Diplomacy is careful, militaries are not. They move fast because their job is not to argue. Their job is to prevent the second hit. While experts work the map, a different battlefield lights up your phone. Anonymous accounts push certainty in all directions. It was a false flag. It was a training error. It was retaliation for something you didn't hear about. None of these threads need to convince everyone. They only need to slow consensus. If democratic capitals take longer to agree on what happened, the attacker gets longer to set the terms for what happens next. This is why modern war begins with bandwidth. The fight for the first story is the fight for the first move. Hour 1 becomes hour 3 and the fog thins. Intelligence isn't perfect, but it's good enough to brief heads of government with confidence. A short joint statement appears. Allies condemn the strike. Consultations are underway. Assets are repositioning to ensure the safety of the alliance. Words are chosen the way bomb techs handle live ordnance. Low, deliberate, with no sudden movements. Across the Atlantic, governors receive quiet calls about guard availability. Families in military towns recognize the rhythm. The calendar in the kitchen becomes a grid of possible departures. Airline routes adjust around risk zones. Oil futures twitch higher on speculation alone. And in data centers, cyber defenders raise shields. Banks, grids, hospitals, airports, logistics hubs. If this is the opening of a hybrid campaign, the next strike might be digital and aimed directly at civilian nerves. By hour 6, the domestic effects are visible. Gas stations update price boards even before markets close. News networks shift to wall-to-wall coverage and callers ask questions that feel like artifacts from a museum. Is the draft coming back? And what does Article 5 actually do? The answer is colder than politics. Article 5 is not a button that launches missiles. It is a lock that clicks the alliance from consult to defend, and the speed of that click depends on attribution, on risk, and on the credibility of deterrence. The United States cannot afford to look hesitant if it wants escalation to stop, but it also cannot afford to act in anger if it wants escalation to stop. That is the paradox leaders are paid to navigate. Hour 12 and capitals coordinate a second, firmer message. If attribution is confirmed hostile, the phrase collective defense appears. Fighters shift to layered patrols. Tankers orbit longer tracks. Maritime surveillance tightens the net, and electronic warfare units move forward. Commanders establish red lines in practice even if politicians have not said them aloud. Non-allied capitals receive private calls that are less diplomatic than the public statements. Do not use this moment. Stay out. Energy markets read those calls from the price tape, even if they never hear a word. Every rumor of a pipeline outage, every whisper about a terminal slowdown, every headline about an insurance restriction on shipping pushes numbers higher. The effect walks straight into your life, not with a tank but with a receipt. Groceries edge up, flights edge up, utilities edge up. Inflation is not an argument, it is arithmetic. Hour 24 brings options to leaders, and none of them are clean. A proportionate strike on the launch site risks a response. A public show of force with no shot fired risks looking weak. A cyber retaliation risks escalation in a space where escalation is hard to measure. And a muscular posture with deliberate restraint, the classic Cold War move risks, giving the attacker the initiative later. This is the hardest hour. Resolve must be seen, restraint must be real, and credibility must survive both. While Europe balances on the fulcrum, the Indo-Pacific watches like a hawk. Beijing studies not the words but the seams. Did the alliance move quickly? Did it agree internally or argue in public? Did markets panic or steady? If NATO is tied down in Europe and looks divided, the temptation for opportunists grows. A provocative air intercept here, a blockade rehearsal there, a cyber probe against an island's power grid. No one needs to announce a second crisis. They only need to design one. The nightmare for Washington is not a single front burning, it is two fronts smoldering, each one just hot enough to demand attention and resources. Back in the United States, the quiet machinery of mobilization continues even while headlines focus on speeches. Bases in the Midwest adjust training calendars, sealift planners dust off schedules and route capacities. Logistics commands run tabletop checks on spare parts. Jets don't fly on patriotism, they fly on bearings and fuel and software patches delivered at the right minute. The public rarely sees this work and would find it boring if it did. But in the real world, deterrence is not a sentence, it's a supply chain. If your warehouse is late, your credibility is late. Now we step into the second day, and the fight expands along three invisible axes. In the air and at sea, the risk is a mistake, a misread radar return, a pilot too aggressive on a dark intercept, a patrol vessel that drifts over a line it can't see. In cyberspace, the risk is a cascade. A hospital's network goes down so ambulances reroute ports, scheduling software freezes so trucks stack up on highways. A regional grid sheds load to protect itself, and a city sees the lights flicker. In trust, the risk is corrosion. A fabricated video that looks real, a genuine clip that looks fake, a rumor that outruns the correction because the correction is boring. The United States must hold all three lines at once: deterrence without accident, cybersecurity without paralysis, and communication without noise. Somewhere around hour 36, the domestic argument heats up. One current says the alliance must strike back immediately to make repetition unthinkable. Another says the alliance must exhaust every tool short of kinetic action or risk a spiral. Both positions are defensible. Both can be manipulated by outsiders who want the argument to become the story. When people are scared, anger is easier to sell than patience. That is why clarity matters. If citizens understand the tripwires and the timeline, if they understand what Article 5 is and is not, panic has less room to grow. The third day is where accidents become trajectories. If there is a second incident, another strike, a shootdown, a serious cyberattack, the political space for restraint collapses. Mobilization orders follow, not because leaders want war, but because the credibility of the alliance cannot survive a pattern of unanswered attacks. You will see it before anyone says it. More jets overhead, more siren tests, more emergency alerts on phones, more visible security at ports and power stations. Your town will feel bigger and smaller at the same time. Bigger because global events march down Main Street, smaller because routines compress to what's essential. For households, the practical questions cut through the noise. How do you stay steady if the power blinks? If the card readers go down? If your bank app times out? If flights cancel? If your guard unit leaves with little notice? The answers are not dramatic. A couple of weeks of essentials. Backups for light and information. A plan for meds and for relatives who need help. Cash for when a machine says offline. Preparation isn't fear, it's friction reduction. In a stress event, everything takes longer and costs more. The more ready you are, the less you add to the line. None of this requires assuming the worst. It requires assuming what history teaches: that escalation is a process, not a leap. That small incidents grow inside crowded spaces. That alliances deter only when they look like they will, not when they say they will. The goal is not to predict catastrophe. The goal is to map the path that leads there, so leaders and citizens can choose another one. So step back and look at the whole picture. A single strike on NATO soil forces a race between coherence and confusion. Coherence looks like quick attribution, unified messaging, firm but measured posture, hardened networks, and backchannels that never close. Confusion looks like contradictory statements, visible divisions, performative threats, and systems that fail exactly where civilians can see them. One path deters, the other invites just one more test. There are outcomes that avoid a wider war. The alliance can show strength without kinetic retaliation, combining forward posture, non-kinetic pressure, and explicit red lines backed by capabilities you can see on satellite photos. Moscow can decide that ambiguity is no longer useful. A negotiated deconfliction channel can reopen with teeth. Markets can relax, prices can cool, and the news cycle can move on. But those outcomes don't happen by accident. They happen because planning was real before the incident, because resilience was built into networks before they were tested, and because the public understood that preparation is not panic, it's policy at the neighborhood level. And there are outcomes that do not avoid a wider war: a second strike, a misread intercept, a cyber cascade that forces a kinetic response, a domestic political shock that corners leaders into choices they would not have made yesterday. In those branches, the United States won't debate whether it is involved. It will debate how much, how fast, and for how long. The bill will not be theoretical. It will arrive as fuel and food and flights and interest rates and headlines that refuse to end at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching from America tonight, the most important thing to remember is that distance is not insulation. The alliance exists because oceans don't stop shockwaves anymore. Energy moves in hours, code moves in seconds, panic moves in a heartbeat. What defeats panic is information clear, timely, unexaggerated, and leadership that treats citizens as adults. Tell people what you know and what you don't. Tell them what you are doing and what you need them to do. Then do it faster than the rumor. Here's the bottom line. Article 5 is not a myth, and it's not a magic spell. It's a promise that only works if everyone believes it will be kept. That means the United States must be ready before the incident, not after. Ready in posture, ready in logistics, ready in networks, ready in public understanding. If a strike hits NATO soil, the first 72 hours decide whether the story is containment or acceleration. If we move with speed, discipline, and unity, the headline can be de-escalation. If we don't, the headline writes itself. If this helped you see the timeline more clearly, subscribe to Red Alert Zone and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who still thinks a distant plume can't touch a local bill. When crisis strikes, don't just react, be ready. Stay informed, stay prepared, stay steady.